a guardian of life and a beacon of trust. The path is arduous, but rewards, both for the physician and the lives they are going to touch, is immeasurable. And to enlighten us regarding the same, I'm going to invite Dr. Tajinder Singh, Chairperson, Center for Health Professions Education, Adesh University. Sir, please, if you may.
Interesting to be back with the young crowd and share some of my thoughts. In fact, I wanted to start with the story of Karn and Parshuram. I hope many of you might have read about it or have seen in the TV serials. Just repeat some parts of it to make up a few points. You might be aware that Parshuram was a word rid of Khatris because of an old enmity. And Karn, who was a friend of Duryodhan, wanted to learn some of the lessons in archery, especially how to use Brahmastra from Parshuram. But unfortunately, Parshuram was dead against Khatris, and he would not allow Karn to join him as a disciple and learn the tricks. So what Karn did, he pretended to be a Brahman, and in the garb of a Brahman, he went and joined the ashram of Parshuram to learn about various weapons and astra, brahmastra, etc., whatever was prevalent at that particular period of time. Now one day, Karn was sitting in the lawn and Parshuram was sleeping with his head on Karn's lap. And it so happened that an insect came under Karn's thigh and bit him very badly. But to make sure that the Guru is not disturbed, Karn did not move his leg. He just kept on sitting quietly. It is only when Parshuram felt his blood soaking his back that he got up and asked Karn that no Brahman can tolerate this much of pain. Tell me who you are. So at that point of time, he confessed that actually he is a Kshatriya and he came to learn the various fighting techniques and astra and shastra and so on. Parshuram was very angry. So he told, okay, you have learned this from me, but I curse you. When the time comes, you will forget all this. And that's what exactly happened in the war. Arjun was about to kill Karn, and that was the time when Karn decided to use a Brahmastra. He took out the weapon to use it, and he had to die. Something similar happens with us. I'm sure many of you can relate this. You read about the topic, you prepare it so well, and when the examiner asks in the viva, suddenly the mind goes blank. Now, why does this happen? And let me tell you that actually speaking, there is no difference in the intelligence. A person who scores 100th percentile in NEET and a person who scores say 70th percentile in NEET are mentally same. Their grey matters are of the same size, their neurons, their connections are of the same size. So it is not that who scores high marks has got some extra amount of grey matter and that makes him more intelligent. It doesn't happen that way. Only difference is that he organizes his knowledge better so that when required, he can quickly recall that piece of knowledge. It's just like library. You put an anatomy book in the medicine section, and I can bet on it, no one will ever be able to find that book. Now, if you learn properly, but when it comes to filing, and unfortunately, God did not make our mind work like a computer. We don't have folders. You don't have a folder for anatomy, folder for physiology, folder for biochemistry, and then you store all that knowledge in the folder, and when required, you just click on that folder and wow, the knowledge comes. It doesn't happen. And this forgetting is a major perpetual problem with most of the students. I remember when I used to go for Viva, Same thing, you were so full of knowledge, bubbling with knowledge, but suddenly when examiner asks something, blank. So let's try to look at some of the ways and techniques which I'm going to share with you, which you can use. Maybe you have already read this, maybe you already know about them, but try to look at them from my perspective. I'm going to give you a different perspective of how to look at the whole issue. If you look at the learning, in fact, there has been a lot of change in the perception about learning. In olden times, olden means my time when I was a student, they used to think that experts are recognized by knowing what they should know. So anybody who knew more was considered an expert. And we are all brought up in the same milieu. So mind you, our conditioning is also the same. I remember one day my son, when he was maybe around 10 years or 11 years old, he asked me something and I told him, "Beta, mere ko nahi pata, I'll have to read and tell you." He was shocked. He looked at me like this, "Tusi the papa, tanu bhi nahi pata." And sometimes we look at our teachers like that, with awe. Oh, he is a teacher, he knows everything. And then we think that the amount of knowledge is infinite. Keep on reading, keep on reading, keep on reading, and it will keep on accumulating. The learning begins by contacting an authority. So a teacher has to come to initiate the learning process. And there is no question for uncertainty. You are a teacher, so you have to dogmatically give an answer. And that answer is taken as the truth, the gospel truth. There are no two views about that. That if a teacher has said something, or if his 1 year senior student has told you something, you can't doubt that as the truth. But over the period of years, in fact, there have been a lot of changes in the way we knew knowledge. So experts are not those who know everything. Rather, experts are those who know what they do not know. But they know from where to know. I may not know everything about pediatrics, but I know that if I have to find something about the recent advances in meningococcal vaccine, where can I get it? I know what is the authentic source of information to know about the recent antibiotics that I should be using in my practice. And we also know that it is not possible to know everything. In fact, people have looked at it like this, that the half-life of medical knowledge is only 3 to 5 years, which in simple terms means that by the time you leave your medical college, half of what you were taught is already outdated. And you have to learn new knowledge to stay relevant, to be able to practice, to do that. And so learning begins not by contacting an authority, but learning begins by being in practice. And lastly, uncertainty is actually legitimized. A good teacher of today will not scold you for asking something which he doesn't know. Rather, the response would be, okay, let's together try to find out what does this mean. Let's together try to find out what is the correct way to solve this given problem. And if I make a quote from Herbert Simon, what he says, that the meaning of knowing has shifted from being able to remember and recall information to being able to find and use it. So if at the end of 5 years, you are still at a stage where you can rattle off 20 causes of pain in abdomen, or you can rattle off 10 side effects of drug A, but cannot help a patient who has presented with pain in abdomen, then probably your learning has not happened. Because learning is not knowing. Learning is being able to put that knowledge into practice, to put that knowledge into use. Now, I do not want to bring theories with you but for better understanding. Just 3 different types of learning are recognized. The first is behaviorism. That means you give a stimulus, there is a response that you learn. The Pavlovian reflex. You show a piece of bread and he will start salivating. So we at one time presumed like this, that the moment patient comes and he says pain in abdomen, the doctor will come out with 10 causes of pain in abdomen. So that was the first school of thought. The second came that we don't really want you to become robots. We don't want the students to be, and I recall that one dialogue from the movie Three Idiots, that even a lion can be taught to jump, but that is called a trained lion, not an educated. So at the end of 5 years, we do not want you to become trained doctors. We want you to become educated doctors. Because by the time you finish your post-graduation, 100% of the knowledge would be outdated. And you probably will have to go through the whole thing again. And it's very interesting. When I finished my MD and joined a hospital, and we were called to the labor room to resuscitate a newborn, and the gynecologist, obstetrician who was performing the cesarean, she said, "Doctor Sahab, connection check kar lena." Which connection? Never heard of it. Which connection? So we had to unlearn. That's a big problem. The way you are taught is not really the way you function in real life. And so you have to unlearn a lot of things and then relearn. Because unless you unlearn, it's like that story of an old Chinese monk who gave a cup full of water to his disciple and said, "Now pour more water into this." He said, "No, I cannot." He said, "That's exactly the point. You have to unlearn first and then put a new knowledge into it so that you can become clear." And this brings the distinction between what is called a passive learning and an active learning. Now, although most of these concepts have originated from the school education, but many of the times they are equally applicable to a college education. Now, in a passive learning, what would happen? You would go to the college, you would read the books, you would do as you were told, you may write some notes in your classroom or do some assignments and read through your notes. And that's your learning. And then you write in the examination. If you write it correctly, you pass and move on to the next one. But when you come to active learning, then the verbs change. If you notice here, it is I analyzed the text. I didn't read the text. I analyzed. What is called reading between the lines. What is written and what is implied. What does it mean? And then I make decisions myself, whether to read from this book or from that book. What is given good here, what is not given good here. So where should I go to get more up-to-date information? I compare, I contrast, I find connections, and I reflect on what I have learned. Now this reflection is an important piece of intervention. I'll come back to it a little later. And then I learn. So if you notice at the differences between active and passive learning, your role changes. One is to go to the class, sit there, just listen to what the teacher is saying, maybe just write a few notes in your notebooks, close the notebook, wait for the exam, then we'll read and finish. That is one way. The second is what you have learned. Sometimes immunization schedules, for example. You may have a different version in community medicine and a different version in pediatrics. So you analyze, you compare, you contrast, and then see why those differences are there, which is going to give you a better kind of learning. So what are the ways which will enhance your learning? First is to get challenging experiences. Just sitting in the classroom, listening to a lecture, watching a YouTube video is probably not going to give you the challenging experiences. When you go to the community, when you find that this child needs hospitalization because he or she is dehydrated, and the mother is not willing because they don't have money. Now what do you do? Now that is the kind of challenge which will help you to learn in a better and a longer lasting way. Second is learning in context. Please remember that learning is never happening in a vacuum. It's not that I will learn about anatomy of something, but what am I going to do with that anatomy? I don't know. I hope there is no biochemist sitting in this hall, but typically, how do you learn Krebs cycle? You learn Krebs cycle, you write in the exam, you forget, you learn it again, right? Forget, learn it again. That's what you keep on. In one of such meetings when I was talking to students at AIMS Kolkata, one student got up and said, "Sir, it's five years already," he was an intern. "It's 5 years already and I'm looking for an opportunity where I can use this knowledge of Krebs cycle." I told him, "You are lucky. I have been looking for it for last 37 years and I have not found an opportunity where to use it." It is because the teachers are subject experts. They teach according to their context. But we don't have to learn that way. None of you are being trained to become an anatomist or a biochemist or a pharmacologist or a surgeon or a pediatrician. You are being trained at this stage to become a physician of the first contact. And that is where the context matters. So when we have a family adoption program, then one of the reasons is that you can go in the community and learn in context. Third is to get an opportunity to practice. When we were students, we used to spend our vacations in our OPD learning how to give intramuscular injections, how to give IV injections, and so on. These days, students spend not only their vacations but also their teaching time in the coaching classes. So the opportunity for practice is not there. And as I said earlier, the concept of knowledge is not knowing. The concept of knowledge is using. And unless you practice that, you will not learn in the true sense. And lastly, creative conversations, group discussions, small group learning, talking to your teachers about what is not clear, talking to your fellow students about what they have understood. Because sometimes what happens is we keep on looking at a thing from only one perspective. But when you talk to somebody else, then suddenly, oh, I never thought of that. And that actually is the right or correct way of doing things. And the last, and probably the most important, is reflection. Reflecting on what you have learned. We'll come to this reflection part a bit later, so I'll elaborate more on that. But at this stage, I can only say that when I said creative conversations, I was talking about talking to others. When I say reflections, I am talking about talking to yourself. And one of my colleagues, in fact, put it very nicely that what is reflection? So reflection is like मैं और मेरी तन्हाई अक्सर ये बातें करते हैं. Talking to yourself. This is what I learned. But that class, ma'am told this way. But this class, it was like this. Anatomy, they said this. But physiology is like this. Oh, so this is what it is. This talking to yourself is actually what makes learning last longer in your mind. And the commonest problem is not that you have a low IQ, not that your gray matter is smaller as compared to other. Problem that we have not organized the material in a way so that when you need it, you actually can get it quickly. Let's talk a little more about learning in context. Now, one is to, for example, pick a book and say 10 causes of this and 10 indications of this, 10 side effects of this and so on. That is one way of doing. The second is to, for example, you have seen a patient of pain abdomen today in the hospital ward and then go back and read about that patient. every class has those kind of students. We also had, who would brag. Harrison, page 1 से page जितना भी उसका end में है 2000 तक whatever, मैंने 10 बार पढ़ी है. And Goodman and Gilman, page 1 से page 1500 तक 3 बार पढ़ी है. True. But when it comes to using that knowledge in context, they are at a loss. And so reading in context of what you have seen, go back and read about that. What has been taught in the class, go back and read about it. Most commonly what happens is that, like now there have been some changes, but prior to this, when we were teaching pediatrics to our students, that was happening in third year or second professional. And pediatric exam was to happen 3 years down the line. So most of them would write notes, close the copies, keep it in the shelf. अभी तो एनाटॉमी फार्माकोलॉजी पढ़नी है, पैथोलॉजी पढ़नी है, पीडियाट्रिक को बहुत टाइम है, तो बाद में पढ़ेंगे. And that bath never comes. And by the time you open your copies, it is like going through the whole thing again and again and again. Second is cumulative learning. We do not have a hard disk which is formatted. This hard disk already comes with lot of information. What you have learned in your school, what you have seen around you, what has been taught to you in various subjects in basic sciences, for example. So by the time you reach your clinical years, this hard disk is already having a lot of information. And rather than trying to learn from the beginning, what you need to do is to build on what you already know. If I give you an example, you may have been taught typhoid in medicine. And you have learned all about the signs and symptoms and diagnosis and treatment and so on and so on. And then you have been taught about typhoid in pediatrics, in children. Now you don't have to restart the whole thing again. All that you need to do is to just remember the differences between typhoid in adults and children. And you cut down your learning efforts by half or even less than that. And now, reflections. Some very basic, simple questions you can ask yourself. And mind you, reflection is talking to yourself, not to somebody else. So, do I feel about my management of this case? I presented this case, I gave this plan of action. Am I happy with that? And then, if yes, then why? Or if I'm uncomfortable, then why? That is what will make your learning better and stronger. Do I need more information, skills, attitudes to manage this case? If yes, then what exactly I need? And did I learn anything new? If so, what did I learn? Next time when you go to your clinics or your classes, at the end of it, just ask yourself, what did I learn today? It's very easy to say, Sir taught us BNS. Sir taught us the type of witnesses. What did I learn? Ask yourself that question. If you can answer that, then you have learned. If you are still at, I was taught this, I was taught this, I was taught this, then probably learning still has not taken place. And Edmund Burke very rightly said that to read without reflecting is like eating without digesting. So you can keep on reading, keep on reading. It will just keep on adding to fat. Just increase your body weight. But it will not go where exactly it is required. There can be very many ways of writing reflections or about thinking about reflections. But one of the simplest is this Rolf model. And what it says is you have to answer 3 questions. First, what happened? Second, so what? Third, what next? Now I have copied the reflections that were written by one of our students after a visit to a child guidance clinic. I'll not read it. You can go through it while it is projected. And try to see if all the 3 questions have been addressed. What happened? So what? What next? And the keyword here, which tells you that learning is happening, is something like I realized, I found, I thought, I saw. Those are the things or expressions which actually convey that reflection is happening. There's another example. Now it's in the medical ICU. And as you go through this, you'll realize that many of these things cannot be assessed or examined using conventional methods. Nobody will tell you write an essay on what did you learn from that. No teacher will, no NEET will ask you a question like this, which of the following is true about them. Never. But reflections provide you an opportunity to learn a lot of things. And as I come to the roles of Indian medical graduate, then you will realize that many of the things are actually not being taught explicitly or examined. Now these are the 5 rules which were given in the 2018 iteration of the regulations, and if you look at the 2024, then they added 2 more rules to that. So clinician, leader, communicator, lifelong learner, professional, researcher, and critical thinker. Now how do you assess professionalism? You can't. By MCQs you can't. How do you assess communication? Or lifelong learner? Probably not. Now it is the reflections which give you an opportunity to really demonstrate that learning is happening. And second thing which I wanted to share with you is how to organize the material. Because what I have been emphasizing right from the beginning is that probably it is a failure to organize, failure to put it in the right folder at the right place where you can draw in case of a need in later life. So during both self-study and during classroom, you can use certain simple tricks. Maybe you have already read it while you were in schools, or maybe which means you first look at the book, survey, what does it say, what are the topics discussed, what is the depth to which it has been discussed. Question yourself. So you are reading a chapter on typhoid compared to a plain fact. So if you say what is the etiological factor of typhoid, and then you say Salmonella typhi, this is going to be remembered for a longer period of time than to simply say Salmonella typhi causes typhoid. And these are proven psychological facts over a number of studies. Next is to read. Recite. How many of you can recite Baba Black Sheep? More, Baba Black Sheep. Dhado Hata. And why do you remember that even till today? Because your ma'am made you recite. You were excited. And remember, whenever there is excitement, the learning is always longer lasting. Let me ask you a personal question. Remember your first date? What did he or she wear? What did he or she say? What was the gift you received? Remember everything? Remember? Okay, what is the nerve supply of this muscle? Excitement. Whenever there is excitement, positive emotions, your learning is always better. Whenever you make it a drudge, it's only exam में लिखेंगे तो भूल जाएंगे उसके. फिर जरूरत नहीं है. Another thing you need to keep in mind is this curve of forgetting. If you read only once, then by 4 weeks you would have forgotten most of it. But if at the end of 1 week you read it again, that is first repetition, your retention will be better. You read it again, your retention will be even better. And so by the 4th repetition, you would be able to remember at least 75 to 80% of them. And therefore, it makes a lot of sense to break your study periods into small. If you are to read topic A, don't devote 1 hour at one go. Give 20 minutes, break, read something else, come back to topic A. That helps you to remember. It's just like immunization. One shot, you may have some immunity, it will go off after some time. Second shot, probably it will be lifelong. And in your school days, you must have read or heard that you involve your mind. The more you learn, the more you try to simply memorize, the more you forget. So please keep these two things in mind. Next thing, stressors. And these are very common. And some of the common stressors, excessive course load, inadequate rest. And that actually, stems out from कि आखिरी के 2 महीने पढ़ेंगे, बाकी 8 महीने ऐश करेंगे. Then irrational thoughts about exams. मैं तो फेल हो जाऊंगा तो ये हो जाएगा तो वो हो जाएगा. And what is very interesting is that if you look at the difference between male and females, there is actually a difference. Both view the things differently. So particularly course overload, females feel more contrasted to male students. Second, inadequate rest, again more common with females. Third, no control over examination situation, more common with females. Actually most of them are more common with females. So the strong gender needs to better organize. They are strong, already they are strong, no doubt about it. But what is required is probably organization. Because unless you organize it well, it becomes very difficult to recall the information when actually it is required. And then look for mentors. Teachers you already have. Look for mentors. Mentors are the ones who can help you see through a professional situation. They are the ones who can help you analyze a given situation and find a way when you are experiencing conflicts. And they can stimulate and motivate you to learn better. In many colleges, I believe we already have a system of mentorship in our institution also. So try to make use of that opportunity. Two things which are actually highly underused, in my opinion. One is reflections, second is mentors. We do it as a ritual because it is to be done as part of the course. We have to submit it to the principal's office, so we will do it, but not really for the sake of learning. So please try to use reflections and interactions with mentor, which both will help you. And what Brian Herbert says, the capacity to learn is a gift. Ability to learn is a skill. But willingness to learn is a choice. So make that choice. Exert that choice. Don't just look at the examinations. Don't just look at ping and purge. Either khaya, either vomit kiya, either. Don't look at that cycle. let some things go in the brain and stay there. And nothing can emphasize the importance of context better for making a good student and a better learning. And I couldn't find a better closer to this than to say Kagacheshta, efforts like a crow. कितने साल हो गए, कौवा अभी भी प्यासा है, अभी भी पत्थर डाल रहा है उसमें. He has not stopped. Pako dhyanam, trying, be focused on what you are trying to do. Shvana Nidra, don't sleep 12 hours at one stretch. Alpahari, eating less. Sadachari, doing good deeds, good jobs. These are the 5 features of a good student. Kagacheshta, Pakul Dhyanam, Shvana Nidra, Tathayavacha, Alpahari, Sadachari, Chhatra Lakshmi Pancha. Thank you for being here.
I hope it will be very helpful for the student. अगर आपने ध्यान से सुना है तो thank you. So next session we have Dr. Mindy Veddi, and she is coming.